type of view of men and women.
Yeah.
He was, and he really pushed education. Oh, this was it.
Uh-huh.
Enlightened absolutism that was awaited by Voltaire,
Uh-huh.
the author of this book says. But
Huh.
yeah,
No, that's crazy. Like I just said, it's like, and I guess really haven't seen that with any other leaders in some way, where it's like they have this broad, and maybe it's the time, maybe it's, the French had some success, obviously,
mm,
um, during the Napoleonic Wars at times, but it's almost like it's like, wow, this guy, where he's probably the shortest guy. He's the chubbiest guy of all these leaders and everything. It's like he has just this very tight, like I said, like a very small lens on humankind. Yet when he looks at the globe itself, it's like I can still own this even without understanding how each figure fits into that piece.
he's well. If you think back to his beginnings, he's Corsican. He wasn't real French, and
Right.
so his original name was Napoleone Bonaparte or something like that. So he was an outsider who had to prove himself in the eyes of the French establishment at that time, and so yeah, in
Right.
one way he's getting rid of that establishment and creating opportunities for people like himself who were not of original old regime nobility, and creating more of a meritocracy and giving people a chance like him to advance. But he made it very specific forms of advancement. You had to advance through military services, services state,
Right.
and
Right.
so he, he was setting it up for people to do something similar to him, but he was also putting himself in a position to make sure nobody could usurp him. So he was kind of, when he's had got dual standard. He's like, oh, I want
Yeah.
people to do what I did, but not do everything I did. And then I still think he's got. I mean, I'm living here in Japan and being an outsider looking in. He still always felt, probably in the back of his mind, he had to prove himself that he was
Right.
really, really, really French. And so all of his ability to mobilize the French and get this newfound French nationalism wasn't a way to prove, hey, look, I'm doing this for France. And
Right.
that I think whether he consciously was thinking of that all the time, that was probably something in his mind that was always an underlying motivation for a lot of what he did.
I, Alone the psychology behind Napoleon and everything. Like I know back in, what was it, in high school, I did a research paper on Corsica, and I did like a whole thing about the mindset of living on an island, where Corsica was so uniquely placed amongst Italy, and to the south you had northern Africa, and you had the
Mm-hmm.
southern Mediterranean, and then France, of course, is like way over here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because it's like he had that mindset of like he had to get himself out of here, and there's some psychology to that too. I feel like you just said, there's some, like, Napoleon felt like he had to do something more with himself, but just didn't know how to do it, so he had to really like put himself somewhere, which was France, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it will. Yeah, because France was a nation state at that time. Italy still was a collection of different states. I mean, I don't think, yeah, Italy didn't really come together as one united Italian peninsula until towards the very end of the 19th century, and that was
Right.
with Garibaldi and other people. But I think the very first major Italian state to push that was in northern Italy. Was the Piedmont? Piedmont is
Yeah, I think you're right.
they were the first real ones to push it, but you still had all these city states, and then plus you had the Roman Catholic Church. Yeah, there it is. Piedmont, Sardinia was the one that really started pushing it. Yeah, and in Corsica, it's so crazy because they're closer to Italy
Yeah,
than they
exactly.
are to France. But yeah, yeah, the whole it's a really fascinating period, and you think about it. The when I was reading back through it, between like 1800 and 1815, Europe was basically in a state of war the
Yeah.
entire time. And I know they call, well, we had World War One and World War Two, but I think World War One and World War Two are kind of like World War 14, World War 15.
Yeah, that's actually a very good interpretation of it. Yeah.
Because if you look, I mean, you have to go, you look at the all the fighting that we had going on in American colonies, and this goes back to in the 17th century. You had the English and the French duking it out in Europe, and then that
Uh-huh.
would spill over into North America, or maybe it would start in North America and would go over to Europe. The Seven Years' War, which ended in 1763, is a perfect example because
Yeah.
George Washington, under stupid direction from the governor of Virginia, marched into French territory, and the French are like, "Go home, old man."
Get out of here.
And he's like, "No, I'm here because Virginia told me." They're like, "No, this is not your land. We'll give you a choice." And so then when it started here, England gambled everything on the colonies, and they paid a bunch of money to Prussia, and Prussia fought as kind of the proxy for England and Europe, and England went and attacked France, and not only North America but India and the Caribbean, and racked up a bunch of debt, which you do when you fight a war of that scale. And then they expect the colonies to chip in not even that much compared to what the average English person was having to pay. I think they said we had to. I think the tax burden on the colonies was less than half
Yeah.
of
Yeah, it
what.
was.
And then just the thing that irked a lot of people. Well, not irked a lot of people. I would say like a third, the rich people, is that it violated the colonial charters, which said
Right.
they had the right to determine their own taxation. And England was like, well, you're English territory, you're English citizens, so you're going to have to kind of shoulder the burden for a war that you started. And so, but that was, so even our Revolutionary War could kind of be considered another world war because France was involved. Spain
Right.
also got involved. England was involved. England was also using Prussian mercenaries and other German state mercenaries. And so, yeah, and then you get to the Napoleonic Wars, and I mean, everybody in Europe is involved, and it's kind of, I mean, that's really no different than World War One, World War Two, because everybody in Europe was involved. So I don't know why. That's always really bothered me is why the World War One and World War Two get that special distinction of being world wars when we've seen wars on a global scale since after the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah, it's these wars have existed for such a long period of time. I mean, when you're talking about like you mentioned it, the American Revolution, it's like um, you're absolutely right. It's there was a, I guess you could say, a fine line. You know, England did rack up its debt. It did. I mean, you have to look at what England was trying to do in the broad scale of things. I mean, they wanted world domination. They wanted everything. They wanted India. They wanted the Caribbean. They wanted obviously Africa along the western coast. Obviously, the slave trade was able to solidify any kind of fortifications or whatever else along the west coast of Africa. That's where obviously conflicts with France came in as well, because the French wanted to fortify northwestern Africa, or started to in that way.
Yeah.
So that butting of heads really started early on, even up until that point. But like, I think you bring up such a good point. It's like the whole, and with the American Revolution, even leading into the Napoleonic Wars, there was this consistent mindset of, you caused this, I'm not paying for what you started mindset. That's like here in America during the foundation of the 13 colonies, and obviously into the American Revolution, after, specifically really after the Battle of Bunker Hill, as the British were starting to move farther south and south and south onto Long Island, Brooklyn, and then slowly towards Philadelphia. There was this mindset of, yeah, we're not going to pay for a single penny of this as of this moment right now. England, you are responsible for this. And I think that mindset even continued. Obviously, Rochambeau coming in, and Marquis de Lafayette and Ben Franklin and everybody convincing the French to join in on this. But I think the French had something else in mind too. It was like, yeah, we're going to help you guys out, but guess what? when the time comes and we know England's going to come back at us after everything that's been occurring to the
Mm-hmm.
east, it's like, you know, and we really didn't get involved that much.
No, yeah, we didn't get that involved in the Napoleonic Wars, partly because, I mean, we were still just a newly founded country.
Yeah, they
We
want to
we
get
were
involved.
still we were still having trouble with Native Americans. I mean, Tecumseh and all the Ohio tribes were still putting up pretty formidable resistance. Probably budget wise, we couldn't afford to do it,
Mm,
and and the British were still up in Canada, and
yep.
the Warhawks, led by people. I believe this is when Henry Clay was starting to get his start in politics.
Yes.
He and all the people from like Tennessee and those areas were really pushing up the British threat, saying, well, the British are, and to some extent they were correct. I mean, but the
Hmm.
British weren't like that actively involved, but the British knew that if they could make it look like they were actively involved, that would be a way to kind of check us. And so, yeah, we kind of had our hands tied, so we couldn't really go in to help France. Plus, the French Revolution was going one way, and then when Napoleon came in, and he kind of starts going another way. It's like I said before, ideologically, we couldn't quite justify it. I mean, in the
Yeah.
20th century, in the Cold War, we could just like, well, they're not communists, so we don't care.
Right.
But I mean, that's a long time in the future. But yeah, at that time, I don't think we financially the threats internally we had plus ideologically we just couldn't really go along with the French, although we did have very good privateers, which that's because we took that tradition from the English and just kept it going.
We had to take something else from them, a
Not
practice of
just
theirs.
not just law, but yeah, good old privateering.
Oh yeah, no, that's
You
so
got good at
true.
it.
Yes, yeah, we became very, very good at that. And no, and even at that time period, I mean, I'm such a big Hamilton fan. I'm such a big like right around that time, 1800 to 1815, 1816, 1817, even into the time of the Civil War. But I know that they use it in the play of Hamilton, and it's like my go-to favorite is that whole cabinet battle idea between Hamilton, Jefferson, Washington, and that whole discussion of the French backed us up. Thomas Jefferson comes back from France. He's really negotiated with France in terms of um, what kind of compensation would be appropriate as time goes on for the U.S. government to obviously discuss with France. I mean, it wasn't until more recently that we paid off the American Revolution on our end here in America. I mean, I think that was like 2012 or something. A news article
Yeah,
came out that said, yeah, guess what? The American government finally paid off part of the end of the French and Indian War and most of the American Revolution. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. It like put things in perspective of how much debt we racked up. And that's what's so important about that conversation between Jefferson, Hamilton, of course, Secretary of State, and Washington at that time is that do we go to help France in the situation? And then, of course, Washington and Hamilton agree, we don't have the money, we don't have the time right now to invest in this. We've got already England bringing warships into American waters in the South, threatening us, which, of course, leads up to the War of 1812 and everything much at that time. But there's so much that happened politically between all these nations. And Napoleon, of course, like you say, is sitting there and he's just rubbing his hands and stuff. He's like, all right, where do I come into this picture?
yeah, and he was very good at moving in. He would win battles, and then he would negotiate favorable peace treaties for himself, and he was just carving up pieces and using. Well, he did something very similar to what you see European powers do. They did it in North America, then they did it in Africa. Is he would just go and take local rivalries, play them off of each other, and then use that to his advantage. And so he was able to like carve up the German states and reorganize them in a way that worked best for him. And so some of the lesser German states that were kind of under the thumb of Prussia, like, oh right, now we can kind of buck them and we can do our own thing. But then in the end, they realized, well, we're just trading one for the other. We traded Prussia now France, more specifically, one of Napoleon's relatives.
Right.
So yeah, it was. It's a really that's a very fascinating period, and people like to living outside of America. I see it so much now, but I don't know why people back home have always thought America's been this isolationist thing, and they always think we need to go back to being isolationist. America's never been isolationist. The
No.
Monroe Doctrine, people always misinterpret it as saying, "Oh, this is our isolationist thing. We're gonna be here. You guys just take your stuff there." No, it wasn't that. It was like the sphere of influence in North America and South America is this new American country. You're European guys. You got your colonies everywhere else in the
Yeah.
world, but you're not coming here to set up anything new. It's us. This is our sphere of influence. So it wasn't isolationist at all. It was very much a statement to the world. Okay, we're playing on the same level as you guys, but this is our area. You just go off and take something else.
Yeah.
And they've we've always been pretty involved in stuff. Even the Civil War, you had the South and the North both aggressively lobbying England and France to try to get them to intervene or to at least not support the other side. And looking at all this stuff in the Napoleonic Wars is a great example. Is that America has always been very from its inception, even before it was a country, from its inception, it has been forever inextricably linked with the events of Europe and other
Yeah.
major powers around the world. And the movie Master and Commander, even though it's a fictionalized portrayal of that period, the fact that the ship they are chasing is an American built ship.
Yeah. Right.
And but what's even funnier is that if they're chasing an American built ship, but one of the crew members was actually in the States and his wife's cousin or something had seen it being built, and so he knew about the ship. And it's just, I mean,
Yeah.
and then the whole impressment of American sailors. When I remember getting taught as a kid, and I was like, oh yeah, that was really mean of the British to do that. But then when I got older, I was like, well, how did an American sound any different than a British person back then?
It's so true. It's like, wait, where is this whole fine line of American and English? No, it's all one thing. It didn't sound any different. And that's what kids are taught here. And it's like there's two separate entities when it's all one culture. I don't get that.
I don't know. I've always tried to. I can't remember any specific studies, but the American accent. I'm trying to really remember when it came about, because if you read old American literature,
Yep.
from the late 18th century, early 19th century, you look at the spelling. Everything is still English spelling.
Yes, absolutely.
They're used for color. They got the U for labor. They got center spelled R-E. And then you get to the mid 19th century, and it's more of a mix. I don't think it was until past the mid 19th century when we finally started saying, this is how we're going to spell stuff, and like drop all of those, what one of my North Irish friends like to call the superfluous U's that were made in a secret factory that were just snuck into the English language. He said, you guys got rid of those superfluous U's and you got rid of the French influence on the language. I was like, well, I don't think we got rid of the French influence, but we made, at least visually, it doesn't look so much French anymore. But yeah, I mean, watching that whole Master and Commander movie again, it really reminded about how, had things gone a little different, the American Republic could have quickly been a failed experiment. But
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's like I know I watched it again a couple times, and I go right back. I know my mother had always written or really enjoys the Patrick O'Brien series with Jack Aubrey's story, and it's like the way that they were able to interpret it. It's the first time watching a historical film where I actually felt they hit the mark in terms of accuracy in places.
Hmm.
Like for once, other than Gods and Generals, because that did such a good job of portraying Stonewall Jackson. I thought.
Yes, yes. I yeah, the American Civil War is a hard thing to go back and watch now because obviously you can't really sympathize with the South because they're fighting for the institution of slavery. Although one man, he was an Irish immigrant actually. He was fighting in the Confederate Army. Patrick Cleburne, maybe you've heard of his name.
Yep. Absolutely.
He at the beginning of 1864, him and a bunch of other, I was they were the Southern generals who were very capable, but because they weren't of established Southern families or
Hmm.
of the Southern, I guess, aristocracy, they weren't put in prominent positions within the Confederate forces. But he and a bunch of other these guys, they got together and they wrote a proposal saying that in order for the South to secure the manpower they needed to gain international recognition and international support, we need to institute a system whereby slaves who like to fight for the Confederacy will be given freedom upon the enlistment. And like I read the whole thing online. I was like, oh my god, wow, this is pretty. Because he's basically saying, you know what, screw slavery.
Yeah.
It's gonna fade out. It's wrong. He's not saying it's wrong. The language they use is so. You can tell that they're against the institution, but they have to word it in a way to not offend the powers that be.
Right.
So in with Gods and Jones, Stonewall Jackson, he's such a fascinating character because I can't think of any time I read him saying something that was derogatory about
He
the
was
American
such a
race.
religious man. He was just so in balance with God and his belief that I feel like he never really wanted, like, he felt that, and that movie does such a good job in those moments, where he does interact with African American men who are fighting for the South. And it's almost like he's got a level of respect. He sees them as human beings, but I think a lot of that is just based on what he believes in religiously. And it's just so fascinating because he carries that throughout his life, even to death.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating because, like you said, I don't think I've ever seen a general like that in not only American history, but even in world history in a way where he plays on an equal playing level with the rest of his peers.
Yeah, he was definitely one of a kind, and I think of all the Southern generals, that was the one I respected the most. I mean, people really loved Robert E. Lee, but
Mm,
he he just benefited from the fact that the North had a bunch of inept generals for the first year that he was in command of the Army of Northern Virginia, and finally, when somebody had half a decent mind of tactics, he was able to stop them. But I remember reading how he said some pretty derogatory things towards African Americans. Like he said
mm.
that as a race, they're not at the proper stage of development where they could gain
Whoa,
freedom.
yeah.
And I remember reading that is I was probably 13, 14. And I was like, wait a second. This
Whoa.
isn't that great of a guy. But then he in regards to monuments towards the South and the cause after the Civil War, I believe it was 1869, and somebody said, "Do you think we should make monuments?" And it was in regard to Gettysburg, I believe specifically, and he said, "No, we shouldn't make any of these monuments. Why would we do that? We'd just be opening up old wounds."
Right.
And so, I mean, I wish people had known that when they were talking about all that stuff in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's neither here nor there now. I mean, but I think Master and Commander, there was only one person of color
Yeah.
on their vessel, but the doctor was Irish.
Hmm.
I think there was probably more than just him that were Irish. They're probably Scots as well.
Yeah, I remember there being a couple Scotsmen on that ship. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought the guy from Lord of the Rings. What was his name? He was he was married. No, not right. Was it married? I can't remember the actor's name. But I think he was portraying a Scotsman. He was the guy that was always at the wheel.
at the oh yes, yes. Oh, I know which actor you're talking about too. It's gonna be frustrating. We're gonna go after this and we're gonna be like, that's who it was. But
Yeah,
yeah, yep. No, there's such a bevy of cultures on that ship in Master and Commander. The one thing that I really do like about Master and Commander is not only like the whole interaction between, of course, Jack Aubrey and Dr. Steven there, but it's like I love how they like the whole Galapagos Island thing for me in that
yeah,
film was just absolutely fascinating. And I know I watched it with my father not that long ago, and he loves the part. And there's so many little twists here and there where Jack Aubrey's like, "Yeah, we're not going to the Galapagos Islands. We have to continue to chase the ship. We have to continue to press on and press on." But then life becomes part of perspective at that point, and it's like I want him to experience the Galapagos Islands, and then how that ties back into the story again, where the ship is docked just on the other side of the island,
yeah.
and it's just like the minute you see the other ship, it's like, whoa, hold on a second. But that's how history was, though. You know, things worked their way for a reason, and they've scripted themselves in a way for a reason to tell these kind of stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of my. I remember watching that movie the first time. Because actually, I saw it here in the theater with my wife. This was before we were married. We were still engaged, and I think it was one of the first movies I went to go see in the theater here. And it came out a few months after it came out in the States. I just remember we're watching that, and then he comes over the ridge, and then you see the French tricolor, and then the musical cue comes in, and I just my jaw was like, oh, no, no way, it can't be. Why? But I mean, from the French, probably the French captain's perspective, he's like, well, he's given up the chase, so yeah, I'm just gonna go dip. Probably had the same idea. I'll just hide here, take it easy for
Yeah,
a while, and then go on out. But yeah, there was the story is so simple. It's just a chase. It's just a
yeah,
long chase, but the way that it is done, and as you said, the attention to historical detail. Like I was watching some of the special features. They took all of the actors and put them on a real ship and gave them like a crash course for 2 or 3 weeks,
mm,
so that they could, when they were acting, they were actually, it was drilled into them, so they were doing it without like by second nature. And I mean, they went to that length just to get it right. And even with like Russell Crowe and the playing of the violin, he actually was kind of playing the violin those parts
mm,
because they wanted to look that real. But so you have this very simple chase story, but at the same time, it's a very good microcosm into. You never see it directly. You never see England. You never see France, but all the
right.
conversation alluding to what is going on. So they have their little world, their two little ships, but they're they're always making you aware of the huge big picture, which is in a sense visually represented by the ocean. They got that the big picture there in the ocean. And probably for myself, my favorite scenes in the movie are always after some major development happens. You have Stephen and Aubrey talking together about
Yeah,
something, and they're a very clever way of showing kind of shift in ideology at that time.
uh,
Whereas Stephen, he's Irish, and the Irish people always forget we're under English rule, and so he and other Scots, well, he and the Scots and other Irishmen, their only way for kind of success is to insert themselves into that system and try to make the best of it. And so he's got those naturalist interests, and so he's using that to kind of get himself into Royal Society. And but he's very in tune with the new ideas of the time, and so you almost get a sense that he sympathizes with some of the ideas of the French Revolution.
Right.
And probably my favorite scene is after they flog the one soldier for being deliberately belligerent to
Right.
midshipman in Holland, and he's talking about people need to be governed sometimes not wisely, but they need to be governed. And then Stephen goes, "That has been the excuse of every tyrant in history, from Nero to Buddha." And seeing that scene again now, and can in putting in the context of what we see going on in the world today, was kind of scary.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of hear certain rulers in our country and other countries around the world kind of giving a similar spin. Probably the most obvious example, well, maybe for me, it's the most obvious example is like Duterte in the Philippines and then Erdogan in Turkey. Two
Mm.
very obvious examples of that. But I hate to say, I think certain members of the American government are hoping to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely influences, you could say, of that over here in America. It's just, oh, it's, you look at it and it's like, it does put that in perspective. The whole conversations that they have. One of the best things about Master and Commander, I still reflect upon it even today. And I have the soundtrack, and I started listening to it. I remember back in high school. That tells you how young I am. Um, I mean, it, the soundtrack choice, the music that they chose to use, Luigi Boccherini,
Ah,
which I think is probably one of my favorite classical composers of all time because the music fits so well. Like the ending of the film
yep.
when they're both playing one of his earlier sonnets. That is probably and even now I watch that scene and I get a little bit emotionally choked up because I got so invested in the story and these two characters. And they have that sunset and the ship taking off, going on its next journey. I think that just defines what probably the author wanted the story to be and what they wanted to accomplish with this film.
All the pieces that they selected for the movie are just really, really good because you have after the first battle and they're getting the ship ready and that little violin. So that's a piece by Mozart, I believe.
Yeah, that is.
And then they use really good piece by Bach
Mm-hmm.
when they go to the Galapagos Islands first time, and then the next time they go to Galapagos Islands is probably one of my favorite pieces. It's a section of it, one of my favorite pieces by Corelli. It's often referred to as his Di Natale, his Christmas thing. But yeah, that whole just the atmosphere is so perfect for that. And then they even throw in a 19th century piece by Ralph Vaughan Williams, the
Mm.
theme of Thomas Tallis, is it? Where they have to cut the ropes to let that one
Yes.
off. And oh, that I think the more each time I watch the movie now, the older I get, that scene just really jerks at me so much because it's
Yeah.
such a sad song, and then the scene is just so
It's depressing.
so depressing because he's been ordered to cut the ropes to send his best friend to his death, but he has to
Middle of
do
the
it
ocean,
because if
yeah.
he doesn't, the mast, the part of the ship that's broken off, is gonna in danger of capsizing the ship, and so it's the life of one man versus the life of the entire crew. Yeah, I mean, all the musical choices for that were so well done, and they talked about it in one of the special features on the DVD. Whereas, yeah, the Corelli piece and the Boccherini piece, that's like early to mid 18th century,
Mm,
and then Mozart would have been later 18th century, and it's like not like today when you got internet and everything can be spread around the world instantaneously. A lot of these pieces probably still being played because you
yeah.
have to think these guys when they stopped in Brazil, they give some mail to some person and like, okay, can you have this sent to England? So these
Right.
records that they give to some guy in Brazil are gonna make it to England probably a year after they sent them.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just the way the world worked. And so the fact that they would have been playing pieces like that, how did one person say it? It'd been no different than like kids today playing Led Zeppelin. Because Led Zeppelin would be like 50 years before their time.
Yeah.
And it's still kind of considered the classic. And so everybody would have played it. But yeah, those, it's a really gorgeous score. And because of that score, it encouraged me to listen to more pieces by those composers, especially Corelli, which I
Mm,
hadn't listened to him much up in, but I knew that piece. And then when I went and researched some of his music, the beauty of YouTube today is you can pretty much find
anything.
every
Yeah.
Baroque composer ever.
That's true.
And there's like, I mean, I've got these lists I've made: French Baroque, um, another list I called Going for Baroque, and it's like
That's a
12,
good name.
yeah, 12 hours of just all sorts of, and because of going that movie encouraging me to go look up this composer, then it became this like never ending cycle. He got me to listen to this composer, and I discovered like another, and this is a good tie into Napoleon. There was a composer by the name of Jean Baptiste Lully,
Uh-huh.
and he's actually, his real name was Giovanni Battiste Lully, and he was Italian, and he had moved to France
Huh.
and was the court composer Louis under Louis the 14th, and he basically established the French court style of music, and he wrote a lot of really incredible stuff. But like Napoleon, he was always having to prove his Frenchness
Right.
to
Right.
the to the French, who are a pretty demanding audience.
Yeah, I mean, for you talk about the French Revolution, obviously, very demanding audience that you have to please very quickly. It's just,
Mm.
it's amazing that and I have to say, watching Master and Commander when I first saw it in theaters, I saw it at the old theater in Exeter, New Hampshire, which now no longer exists, but it was a very small, I think 60-seat theater, very classic uh, theater. You walk in with a popcorn and a soda on a on a Saturday night, and you sit there and you watch it. But I remember them doing like a Thursday night release before the Friday night release at all the other theaters, and there was something special about, and I have to say the cinematography in that film. It
Yeah.
was there's something different about that compared to other historical films. I feel there's a certain it's the lighting that they used, specifically when they go inside the ship and under, and they're showing like the living quarters of everybody, and then especially during the dining scenes when everybody, all the commanders and all the lieutenants and everything sit and they eat. I mean, just some of those shots, just in such a dark setting, is just so amazing.
Have you seen the movie Barry Lyndon with
No,
Stanley
but it's on
Kubrick?
my list.
Okay, if you watch Barry Lyndon, a lot of the cinematography in Master Commander, I saw Master Commander before I ever saw Barry Lyndon, and I had been told by friends, you love history, you love Stanley Kubrick movies, you have to watch Barry Lyndon, and so I finally did a couple of years ago, and I instantly noticed like Master Commander, they almost Master Commander I don't think did it for every scene, but in Barry Lyndon, Stanley Kubrick was adamant about using only natural lighting.
Wow.
Everything is shot in completely natural lighting. So the scenes at night inside these like villas in England, it's all natural lighting. So it's kind of dark, and they got the candles and everything. And so
Wow.
when I watched Master and Commander, especially those scenes in the quarters in the ship, you can tell it's pretty much all natural lighting, and that's what lends it more realism. Another thing about cinematography I liked is there was a lot of long no cut shots.
Mm.
So especially in the last fight when they go on the Ashram, there's I think it's like a 20-30 second no cut shot where it's following Aubrey as he's going
Yes.
down into the ship and he's going through all the different parts, and that's you don't see that in a lot of historical films. And it was kind of when I was in high school, I had a big movie buff friend, and we watched a bunch of movies of all sorts of probably obscure stuff that high school kids wouldn't have normally watched. But one director he liked was Brian De Palma, and Brian
Oh,
De Palma
yes.
is really good at doing those long shots without cuts. And so, yeah, when I saw Master Commander in the theater, especially that last fight against Ashron, the first thing that came, I was like, "Oh my god, this is like no cut." He's gone down into the ship, and he's going all the way, and they finally don't cut until he gets to that French
Right.
guy laying down, and he gets stabbed, and then he's asking him where he's El Capitan, and then it's like, "Oh yeah, the English guys could speak French, you just didn't want to."
They didn't want to expose themselves early to French culture. Now it's like you're right. I think that maybe I'm trying to think. There was that's definitely part of it. I think that especially in the theater setting, like at home when you're watching it, you kind of see it, but when you're in a dark theater and that natural lighting comes through, it really does create a mark, and it also shows the time period too. I think that that's what it does beautifully. The use of artificial lighting really makes no sense in a historical
No,
piece.
no, it doesn't at all.
It takes away from it.
Like one of my favorite. I've seen both adaptations of the original 1936 version of Last Mohicans
Uh
by
huh.
Randolph Scott. It's fun, but you have all Native Americans played by white guys speaking.
Yeah, you're right.
It's horrible.
Just not. Yeah.
Uh, but then the 1992 version with Daniel Day Lewis and what was the name of the actor who played Chingach Cook? He's dead now, but he was a very prominent member of the one of the large AIM American Indian movement.
Mm-hmm.
Russell Freeman. Russell Freeman, I believe.
Yes. Uh huh.
Yeah, but yeah, all the shots in that movie, most of them are natural lighting, like the shots of Fort William Henry, and then all the shots when
Mm-hmm.
they're outside. It's yeah, period piece needs to be done in the lighting of that period. I mean, obviously, if you're in like a 1940s pic, okay, you can do the type of lighting they had in 1940s. But I've seen, yeah, what was the Braveheart? I felt had way too much artificial lighting,
Yeah.
and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, even though it's not a historical film, it was it's supposed to be in medieval England, but
Yeah.
too much lighting. I mean,
Yeah.
in that sense, Errol Flynn's Adventures of Robin Hood was probably a better shot than that.
Right. Yeah, in perspective, that's so true in terms of the lighting. Yeah, I could totally see that. I could totally see that. The other one that I kind of another one of my favorite historical pieces that kind of relates to, and I kind of get the Napoleon feel from this as well a little bit, is the movie The Alamo. Um,
Mm.
which also does a very good job of capturing natural light when you're talking about the
Is
Mexican
this
army and everything.
is this the John Wayne Alamo?
No, it's not the John Wayne Alamo. It was the more recent one with Billy Bob Thornton.
Oh no, I haven't seen that one because
Oh, I'm not going to spoil it then.
I don't even know if it came out here.
Really?
Because some of these movies, I think they what they do is they gauge if interest is potential interest of the Japanese public, and I don't think the Alamo, because the Alamo is a very uniquely American story.
Right. There was the original John Wayne one. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know if they would have brought that out here. I can go maybe it's in our local video store. I can go check it out. But like the movie Unbroken about the
Yeah.
American POW in Japan, that was not released here
Wow. You never even got that.
because there was some pretty far right wing people who said that no, that movie is BS. Japanese didn't do that type of crap in World War II. I'm
Oh.
like, no, you guys did. You need to admit that. But some of these really far right people, I mean, they're the people who say the Nanking rape of Nanking didn't happen, and so it was fabrication by Western media, and they try to justify a lot of stuff that, well, yeah. Long story short, they basically say that Japan was fighting to liberate Asia from Western colonialism,
Wow.
which in some they're only partly right, but they were just basically replacing Western colonialism with their own version because
Wow.
they but yeah, that's a whole long story.
That's a conversation for another time in many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't get it. It's a hard thing to talk about with certain people. You have to really know the person you're talking to before you can make statements about that type of stuff. So I have
Right.
some good Japanese friends who I can talk about that type of stuff with. And then I know some. I mean, you have to be very subtle in the way you talk about those subjects, and then you can say things kind of indirectly, engage. You look at the person's reaction, and you gauge, okay, he's probably on that side, so I'm not going to take this.
That's where they cut the line. That's it. That's the only place.
Yeah, thankfully, Japanese language has a good way of being very indirect and subtle, where you don't put yourself in a hard position. You don't put the other person in an uncomfortable position, so you can kind of very delicately skirt the issue. But it's also a disadvantage because they told the U.S. after the Potsdam Declaration that they were open to surrender, but the reply they gave in Japanese, if you're a Japanese speaker, you understand it. But when you translate to English, it makes no sense. And it sounds like, oh, okay, is that a yes or no? I don't know. All right, I'm dropping another bomb on you. Boom.
And I know that's a big thing for you is the Japanese translation. I know we actually recently at the school that I work at had two students come from Japan, and which was really cool. I don't know specifically what parts of Japan. I think their parents came over here for technology jobs in the Seacoast, New Hampshire area. I know we've had an increase in technology jobs just because of the state wanting to bring in companies in that field. And I think I had a very fascinating conversation with our speech people who then therefore have to sit down with the student. They have to get an idea of their culture, what they're coming in knowing about America, what do they know about speaking English or anything. These two students already knew how to speak English as a second language, which I thought was very, very cool. Their parents had taught them English before they came here. So there's that kind of a nice balance. But one of the students that I saw in the hall, um, I thought it was fascinating because they were reading something outside of the nurse's office. We have this 1, 2, 3 health thing, and I thought it was kind of funny. They were reading it and they're like, "What's this all about?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's like a thing that we do here at the school to help with obesity and everything." And they were just kind of looking at it like they're looking at all this Americanized, and you could probably understand all this Americanized like public policy stuff about healthcare with students and how to stay safe in school. And it was like this very foreign thing. But I know with Japanese culture, it's very strict. It's very it's I don't know necessarily the words to use, but
You're reminded of how to be courteous and to abide by proper decorum. There's a
yes,
lot of that. Like just a really simple, everyday example. When you're getting onto the train, so as you're waiting for the train, you'll hear these speakers say, "Okay, the train is coming. Now, everybody, please be orderly and do not push and shove when you get onto the train. Those of you who are standing on the train, please make way for those who are trying to get onto the train. That way, we do not get anybody stuck in the doors and cause delays." It's like
Right.
it's like a parent telling a child how to behave, but
Yeah.
it's all these little things that you're constantly reminded of. You hear, and I mean, you kind of tune it out after a while, but
Yeah.
it's a constant reminder of how to behave properly for the sake of everybody around you. And you, especially with trains, like everybody's trying to get on the train, so because they got to get to work. But if somebody's people don't move further inside the train to let people on, maybe when the train doors close, some guy's briefcase or some person's bag is stuck in the door. Then they have to
Right.
stop the train. Then have to do a stupid safety check. Okay, everything's fine. Okay, 5 minutes later, the train goes. But so it's very. I don't want to say they're talking down to people, but it's this idea that you have to remind people of how to behave accordingly to
Yeah.
ensure that things run smoothly. And there's good and bad to that. I mean, I love the fact that my kids can pretty much go on a train and not have to worry about strangers coming after them. It's really safe.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like people aren't given the choice to think for themselves,
Right.
or you don't want to do something that might rock the boat. So people feel this, whether they're consciously aware of it or not, there's this kind of pressure to just conform. There's even a phrase in Japanese language, it's like something like "Deterukugi wa utareru," like the nail that sticks out will get hammered down.
Wow.
Something
Powerful
like that.
message.
Yeah. So, but a lot of this is kind of left over from pre-World War II, things like that. But yeah, the whole yeah, that's just it's pretty something I go through on a daily basis, and I have to kind of when I take a step back and think about it, I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I was never. This is what I was brought up in, but it's a good reminder of that people can adapt very quickly to anything,
Yeah.
and the fact that people back home don't think immigrants can adapt to American society, or people here don't think people come from the outside can adapt. Or even like in Master Commander, you had this whaling ship, but these new guys come on and they're registered in the ship's log, and boom, they instantly adapt.
Yeah.
It's a really good reminder that people can, no matter their circumstances, they can adapt.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's a shame that people, despite having that innate ability to adapt, that some people think, for whatever reason, it's not possible. And that's just a real, I think, a belittlement of what people are capable of. And they shouldn't, you shouldn't put that, as they like to say here in Japan, shouldn't put that label on them from the outset.
Right. Right.
The literal translation is don't put the letter on them like that. Something like that. It's like letter inadaptable, but
No, I mean that's what I see in Master and Commander in some way. And when we're talking about the Napoleonic Wars, the transition from America to a country, and then obviously when Napoleon really wanted to do, it's like adaptability is such a huge piece in all of it. It's like
mm-hmm.
Napoleon had to adapt himself to French culture to be able to rally what he wanted to accomplish. America had to rally its people and its government to be able to accomplish what they wanted. England had to rally its government and parliament and the funds necessary to fight a war to be able to accomplish what they needed to do. And no matter what side we come out on, there is that part of adjusting to the natural world around us, to the people around us, but also psychologically adjusting to what is present at that time. It's just there's just so much of that in this culture, and not just American culture, Japanese culture, or European culture, but just as a world culture, the importance of adapting. And Master and Commander, I think, does such a good job of kind of showing that adaptability, people having to work with each other no matter what differences they have.
Oh yeah, because I mean, doctor's Irish. There's Scottish sailors. There's probably sailors that weren't born in England that were pressed into service, but they're all put in a similar environment. They all have to deal with the same circumstances, and so they have to. And then the whalers who join them later on, they have to be like, okay, well, we're on this ship now, so who knows if we're ever going to get a chance to go whaling again? Well, we just gotta stay with this and go at it. And Napoleon, like the whole thing about adaptability, I was remember this part that I was reading in one of my old textbooks. He is really interesting seeing why he favored the revolution. He wanted to see curtailment of the abuse of the old regime. He hoped the revolution might end his island status within France, and he thought it provide him with opportunity for promotion. So he's a very adaptability minded person who's like, okay, I'm going to use this to my advantage and I'm going to adapt to the situation. Once that's done, I will take it to the next step and see how far it takes me. It's just, I mean, my whole life here has taught me that people can adapt so long as you tell yourself you can adapt, so long as you can keep your mind open to the fact that you can adapt. And the most difficult part is showing other people that you are capable of adapting. And it's a good motivation. It can also be something that, whether you realize it or not, can weigh on your mind at times, as I'm sure it did Napoleon.
Mm.
And probably the Irish doctor Stephen, the Master and Commander, because he's working on a British naval ship, and he's an Irishman, and he can't he can't openly be defiant,
Right.
which I thought was really funny. One of that whole quote, talking about how he understands mutinies, and he's getting at Aubrey for basically trying to say that men need to be governed no matter what means possible. And then Aubrey's like, "You came, you came to the wrong place to preach anarchy or something, brother." And he's like, "I don't have any more room for more than one rebel or something like that." And I was like, it's kind of funny because yeah, the Irish would kind of rebel against you guys.
Right.
And so, but yeah, he's in a place where he has to kind of suppress. I don't want to say suppress, but
Mm.
put his identity in the closet so he can function in that society. And I mean, the British Empire as a whole, a lot of people, we were pretty aware of it because when we study American history, we have like the term Scots Irish, and you look at the French Indian War in the I wouldn't say the majority, but a large portion of the British troops that were sent to North America were actually Highlanders and Scots
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because they were actually better fighters and they were pretty good at adapting to the land and but then you look at the Revolutionary War, there was probably quite a bit of Irish fighting the British Army. And if you watch Barry Lyndon, the main character is Irish guy, but he gets involved with So while the French and Indian War is going on in North America, in Barry Lyndon, it talks about the corresponding conflict in Europe at that time. So you
Right.
just see the British and the French fighting in Europe, and then the British and their Prussian allies fighting in Europe.
Huh.
So, and there's some other Irish guys too. And like one of the first scenes of the movie, this won't really spoil anything, but so you have young Barry, he's in his Irish town, and then some guy who had left to go off and fight in the British Army, he comes back with his British troops, and it's a really interesting scene because you see all these redcoats, and then maybe because I was American as a kid, we're kind of indoctrinated to those evil redcoats.
Yeah, right.
And then you're watching it in Barry Lyndon, and you're like, wow, these guys look pretty cool. I can
Yeah,
see why they want to join. And then in Master and Commander, when his whole speech about this is England, I'm like, I'm not even English, but I got fired up.
that's so true. Oh man.
And the funny thing about Master and Commander, they said, was that in the books, I think the ship they're chasing is actually an American privateer, and
Hmm.
they changed it to a French one because they didn't know how an American audience react. But I mean, the American audience handled a movie like Letters from Iwo Jima fine, and that was
Right.
the Japanese fighting the Americans in World War II. Or another good history drama that I watched a couple years ago is what was it called? In English, they called it Generation War. In German, I think they called it Mein Vater, Mein Mutter. And it's about a group of five friends in the summer of 1941, and they make a promise to meet back in Berlin in Christmas time because they think the war is going to be done by Christmas. And so
Uh,
these two brothers go off to the Eastern Front to fight against Russia. And then one of the friends is a German Jew, and his girlfriend is going to try to get some connections with Gestapo guys so she can try to smuggle them out of the country. But anyway, it's like you're watching these German guys who were the enemy in World War II,
mhm.
but you're watching them fight the Russians, and you kind of you see the war from their perspective, and it's a good reminder that just like in Master and Commander and Stephen the Doctor, he reinforces this that people who do the fighting are no more are basically just unfortunate victims of circumstance who are put into a position by powers that be who have their own agenda and don't give two shits about the guy below them.
That's right.
And you see that in that movie like that drama, the German Generation War, Letters from Iwo Jima, especially after, now that I've read so much about the Japanese experience World War II. I don't know if you remember the scene, but the main young guy, he's a
Mhm.
baker, and when the people come up to his shop and they tell his wife, "Congratulations, your husband has been drafted."
Oh yes.
And so there's a word for that in Japanese. It's called akagami,
Okay.
red paper. And so they made a big fanfare of it, but basically, like, I don't know how well it was conveyed by the subtitles, or if people really caught it. But when I watched that actor's performance, he does a really good job of showing how despondent he is by getting this thing. But he
Mm.
puts on this fake patriotism face. He's like, "Thank you very much. I will do everything I can for the good of the country and do justice to the mission that's been given," or something like that. And it's just like, wow, that was really good BS you just said. But it's just
Wow.
it's a very it's a very good reminder. And then the Master Commander again, you see it when they get on the ship when they're fighting the French, and then when he's speaking to that guy, and it's when you get face to face, you're like, he's no different than me. He's the
Yeah.
same as me, and it's like what, and it just that's what I love about that movie. It's a simple chase story, but then you get all the good ideological conversations about all the currents of thought in Europe in that time, and how this Irish guy within the British Empire is reconciling himself with these different trains of thought, and he can kind of sympathize with this revolutionary. And then you get to meet these French guys face to face, and they're really no different than you. And then you think, what was the whole purpose of all this? Why were we fighting? What was it for? There was
Yeah.
no means, no. It's just one short Corsican guy on a power trip trying to prove himself to be in French. And then you got English pride trying to hold on to the empire and
Yeah.
project their hegemony all over the world. And then you got sailors pressed into service, maybe some of them American, maybe some of them Irish, who knows. And the Doctor again, I really feel like he's the whole voice of reason throughout the entire movie,
Mm.
showing he's speaking on behalf of the men, but he's also more than Aubrey. He's the moral compass. Always, which the expression itself is very fitting because it's a ship, and the ship needs a compass
Compass. Yeah.
to travel. And so he is the moral compass. And so there's so many times where he's trying to like tell Aubrey, your nautical compass might be on the right track, but your moral compass is not. And
Such
so
a great line.
there's this conflict between doing what's morally right and what's bound by duty, and yeah, it's that's why it's just a great film. I keep going back to watching it, and I never get. I think outside of Star Wars Saga, that's probably one of my go-to movies. Always is
Yeah.
that and Pulp Fiction, but that's
Yeah, Pulp Fiction's a whole other conversation. Um, yeah, you're right. They're outside of the Star Wars universe for me as well. It's like it's one of those things. It's like historically based films, especially Master and Commander, Gods and Generals. Those two are always my go-to, and they never get old. They never get old for me because either and it's amazing. Even after so many times I've watched it, I do pick up on something new each time. There is something in there
yeah,
that I miss out on, whether it's during the battle scene, there's something else going off on the right hand side here, or I focus more on the cannon scenes when they're down below and they're firing cannons at the ship. I know that on the second viewing that I did most recently of it, I focused more on not necessarily the nautical battle side of it, but more of the psychology of the nautical battle, the way that they were instructing the ship to follow its opponent, and the broadside follow that came around and allowed the cannons to face more towards the front of the hull of the ship instead of trying to go side by side. I think that was the first battle that they had,
yeah,
where it took more of a frontal approach to taking a shot at the other ship instead of going starboard side and trying to fire right into it.
yeah, yeah. That was yeah. The whole strategy element is really fascinating in that, and like the first battle where the French guy comes out of the fog,
Yeah,
and then he gets up on him, and then he positions himself to take out the rudder so they can't
yeah,
fight. It's like, wow, he thought of all that. And then in the last battle, when they are able to bring themselves outside, because that's the only distance by which they can actually do any damage, because
right.
the way the ship was constructed with that type of special American oak, from distance the balls just bounce off of it,
Yeah,
which is it's pretty incredible to think about that. But then they they swing the ship around, and then they are able to shoot right into the back of it,
right into the back of it.
and
Yeah,
it just goes through all of that. Yeah, that's something I've picked up on. Another thing that I always maybe it's because my son is now the same age of Blakeney, the kid who loses his arm.
right.
And so watching it again now my oldest daughter, it was just her and I here at the house for a bit today, and I was watching that, and I was like, that kid, he's the same age as your brother, and he's leading these people
Right?
onto a ship. Do you think your brother could do that? And she looks at me, no, no way, no way, he couldn't do that. And I was like, well, yeah, he.
Yeah.
I was like, it was just such a huge, mind blowing moment thinking about that. I was like, could my son do what this kid is doing here? I mean, he's being entrusted to lead men two
Yeah.
times, three times his age, and indirectly instructed to kill people. It's like, you're going to take your cannon crew, you're going to clear decks, then you're going to board the ship. And then he boards the ship, and then he shoots a guy. This is an 8, 9-year-old kid. But
Yeah.
in this world, that world at that time, and they're being treated like adults. It's like, Mr. Blakeney, yes.
The kid's 9. Yeah.
And the
It's
kid's 9 years old, but he's told, Mr. Blakeney, are you a doctor? No, sir. Right. No, just get away. Get away. Come on, man, we must board them. And I'm like, what? And
oh
it's a really, it's so, I don't want to say that we've regressed as human beings, but the way
wow.
it has developed is that we're not put in such urgent situations. I mean, I'm 36 now, but when I read about people in history, like Oda Nobunaga, the guy who started the whole quest to unify Japan, by the time he was 36, he had half this country under the control. And when he was 20, he's going off, and I read about what he did when he was like 20. I'm like, oh my God, these are 20-year-old people. I mean, 20-year-olds today in the States, all they care about is just passing their courses, and they get wasted on the weekends.
it's so true.
And here's this guy. He's plotting to get rid of scheming uncles who might usurp his authority, and then he's already figured out how to take advantage of the economic situation in his area to profit off certain merchants and get himself financially set up to. I'm like, this is a 20-year-old kid, but he's not a kid. He's an adult, and it's like we have 18 as the age where you get the right to vote.
Yeah.
You can smoke. You have to join the draft registration system. For some reason, you can't drink alcohol, which that's never made any sense to me,
Hmm.
since you're given all those other rights. But you're treated as an adult legally at 18. But nowadays, we don't think of people as being really grown up until I don't know when. It's gotten so blurred. But watching Master and Commander, it's like Blakeney's 9, and he's in charge of people, and then um his friend who ends up, what's his friend's name at
Oh.
the very
Oh.
end.
Shoot. Bah, bah, bah. I remember that scene too. Oh.
Because he becomes lieutenant. That threw me off. I had to realize that the people don't say lieutenant, they say
He's a
lieutenant.
lieutenant.
Threw me off for a long time. I was like, is that some special British naval term? I asked a friend here. I was like, what's a lieutenant? He goes, well, you Americans would say lieutenant. And I'm like, all right, thanks for making me feel stupid. And, but so
Yeah,
yeah,
that part.
he's probably 14, 15, maybe
Mm.
16 tops. So he's lieutenant at 16, and then he unfortunately gets killed. But it's like this 8-year-old kid is in charge of him. He gets an arm amputated, and then Aubrey's like, "Well, his father would understand, but his mother, I don't." Like, how would his mother be okay with? Yeah, my son, I'm gonna send him on a ship. That's fine. But
Right?
it was such a. I never thought about that much first time I saw the film, but now that my kids are close to the age of some of those kids in the movie, it's like I can't imagine my kids acting with that same level of responsibility,
Right.
because we in this day and age don't feel the need to entrust them with that level of responsibility. maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's not a good thing. I'm glad that
Right.
we don't live in such dire circumstances that we don't have to force such responsibility on them. But at the same time, it's kind of like people think kids aren't capable of doing that stuff. They are if
Hmm.
they're given the opportunity and kind of nudged along. So watching the movie again, I kind of had to remind myself that maybe should not sell kids today so short. They can
Right.
do stuff. They just need to be given the push in the right direction, and then sometimes let them figure it out for themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
this
true.
is
I see it as an educator every day in the American school system. There is a certain amount of I don't want to say lack of responsibility, but just on society itself, like you said, kind of undermining the potential of kids at a certain age. I work mostly with kids who are within the 8 to 11 age range, and I know, Dave, you got kids in that age range, so I know there have a generation where there's just so much happening in the world. There's so much technology. There's so much this. There's so much that it becomes ingrained in them. And that's one of the things with one of my teaching practices always is with young kids. And you kind of see the master and commander with Jack Aubrey. It's like you give them, even if it's a small job or a small role in the classroom, or whether it's on a battleship, which obviously we don't encounter much here in New England anymore. We did back then. But it's interesting because you give them that role, and it's fascinating to see what they do with it. That's the
yeah,
big thing. Whether they succeed or they don't succeed, they do succeed in the end because they've had that experience. More recently, with the student that I work with, I gave him the role of delivering something to the front office, and I was always told by whoever the teachers were in the past that he would never be able to do certain things like that. Well, guess what? I gave him that paper. He walked to the front office. He came right back and he said, Mr. Vogt, I did what you asked me to do. And it's like, okay, where else can this happen in this student's life, in this kid's life, if somebody gives them the chance to do it?
yeah, it's a shame to see that there's. I feel this regression that people aren't. I don't want to say brave enough, but they just don't feel that they can entrust people with that responsibility at that age, and they're gonna have to take responsibility sometime in their life, and
Yeah.
so you have to get people experiencing at a young age. Family circumstances put me in that position earlier than I would have liked to when I was young, with my
Right.
parents divorcing when I was 10, and I had four younger brothers and sisters, so I kind of had to grow up faster than I would have liked to, but I did it. I was able to, I was making simple meals for my brothers and sisters at age 12, 13,
Right.
and doing stuff that I never thought I was going to have to do at that age. But you can do it if you're put in this situation. And then I see some of these people back home, and it's like you gotta give your kid a chance. You can't hold their hand all the way through high school,
Exactly.
and then you're like going up. Some of these people like complaining, teachers, you didn't give my son a fair chance. It's like, no, you didn't give your son a chance to figure it out himself. So
Yeah.
you should do it. It's like now I have to remind myself that too. When my kids will ask me, Daddy, how do I do this? I'm like, well, what do you think? I can't tell you the answer. If I tell you the answer, what's the point?
Yeah.
Think about it. What do you need to do? I, oh, okay, I got it. I got it. And that's again, the Master Commander does a really good job of showing that these kids are put in situations where they're expected to make decisions on their own,
Yeah.
and it's really funny that Blakeney, he's an 8, 9 year old kid, and yet he's more capable of doing his job than Hullum, who's 30 and is about to, well, then he eventually commits suicide.
Right.
But he didn't try to act on what he had learned and take responsibility. And he he was, because he was afraid to take responsibility, he wasn't able to do his job correctly, and because he couldn't do his job correctly, he didn't get the respect he should have been afforded, which made it that much more. It just became this vicious cycle where he couldn't get get his job done. If
Right.
he had been able to just do that simple step of being a little bit more responsible, he could have done his job. He would have gotten respect he deserved, and he wouldn't have eventually had to feel he needed to take his life. But yeah, it's just a that movie is a very very good reminder of how different human society is now compared to just a little over 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And whether, I mean, I don't know how we're going to be 100 years from now. Who knows
Yeah.
how, how things will pan out. But it was a sobering reminder of the fact that human society, history, technology, people like to think that, what do you want to call it, evolution, whatever, is always forward progress. It's not necessarily true.
No, it's not.
Things, and what they call it, the Jap. I don't like the Japanese translation of evolution because they call it, one way of translating it is shinka, and shin is susumu, to move forward. Ka
Right.
is change. So the word implies a change in a positive direction. And I think that's not exactly right, because
Yeah.
human beings today, we use less of our mind than ancient Egyptians did.
Right.
We don't know how that's happened. Why the human mind today isn't using as much as it did 2,500 years ago, but that's just the way it is. And we always need to remind ourselves that everything is not in a forward progression. Generally, things are going that way, but you might be going forward and you could veer off and go away from that. You could go in reverse, or you can kind of do in this weird parallel. I can't even talk, parabolic curve off in a weird direction.
Right.
But and it's really interesting because in the movie Master and Commander, they go to the Galapagos Islands, and anybody who knows about theory of evolution will know that Galapagos Islands is where Charles Darwin went to, and that's where he got his whole idea. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, I don't know if they intended that in the movie, but I think it's a very good, subtle hint to people to take a step and think. You have the British and the French fighting in the Napoleonic Wars. You have the French Revolution. You have this whole new idea of government, and so human society is evolving. And then, in the midst of all of this conflict, they go to a place where Charles Darwin came up with the idea that natural species have evolved in a certain way. In this Galapagos Island, it's completely cut off everything. So these species are very unique and adapted to that environment. So I thought it was a really good, again, whether they intended or not, it's a good way to get people to think about how these currents are going, but maybe they're not necessarily going in the right direction. Uh,
Yeah.
Even in Japan, they have a term where they use Galapagos for like Galapagos Keitai, or some type of situation or thing that becomes unique to Japan and that's found nowhere else around the world. Like,
Huh.
we still use fax machines here in Japan. With all our technology, fax machines are still used quite a bit. It's
Right.
ridiculous, but they're still used. they're still used, and they call that the Galapagos effect here. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just that was just something I thought of this week when I was watching the movie again and think about the whole Galapagos thing. I was like, wow, I don't know if they intended this, but that's a really good tie-in to how a lot of stuff would change
Yeah.
in Europe and the U.S. after that, because the emergence of Darwin, his whole natural selection theory, evolution. Then later you have social Darwinism that
Yeah.
came up, and all of that packed into a movie that's just a chase story.
Yeah. It's amazing. They were able to take so many life concepts and life goals and important aspects of life and just kind of mold them into this what was once a novel or a series of novels into a film finally, and to be able to share that with people. You bring up such a really good point, and I think it's the whole concept of to take one big, one giant leap forward, you must take two giant leaps backwards just to be able to get to that point. And I think as a world society, as humankind, in the development of our brains alone, we're learning more and more about how our brains synthesize information and everything. The changes that we've seen in the brain in terms of how do we deal with situations in life and how do we conceptualize our role in those situations. I think there's just so much that Master and Commander, this time period alone, as historians, as people who do research, and people who discuss it, um, it's fascinating because we have seen times change and we have taken steps backwards to now go forwards. However, we've gotten to a point where I think we're starting to take steps backwards just to get to that next place right now. I think that is happening, and I think people are having a very difficult time. And Master and Commander puts it in perspective that to do these things, you do have to take those steps backwards. And I think that's how our conversation here, David, has been that does need to happen, and that this film does do a great job. When you talk about Napoleon, he did have to take steps backwards just to get forward, and that's the whole changing of the mindset and being able to adjust to those situations and everything. I think as humankind, it is so important to do that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very sober reminder that watching this film again, it's when Aubrey is sitting there and he's saying those things, and Stephen, again, that moral compass reminding him, you know what you're saying is basically you're no different than any tyrant in history, and it's a good reminder to take a look at the way things are going, and we need to see, did we really ever address this in the past? Is this
Yeah,
something we've just kept under the surface? And a lot of the issues that are happening in the States back now, for me at least, and I see this and I watch movies like Master and Commander, and I think about these things, and it's almost like we never ever took the time to reconcile these things. And
yeah,
people, again, think that history is you're moving along. Things that are left in the past have no relevance to the present, and well, time has taken care of it. And that's not the case, and recent events in America have shown that to be, very unfortunately, it's been a really rude awakening to show that some of these things we thought had been banished to the past, no, they're not. Those are
yeah,
viable skeletons that are in our closet right now that are going to keep rearing their head unless we take the time to look at everything that's happened and try to address it. And if we don't do that, we're going to see people like Aubrey in Master and Commander, if they're not held accountable to some moral compass, which is Steven in that movie, they're going to go off and do things that aren't what they intended, but in the end, they become the thing, just like Anakin became the thing that he was sworn to fight against.
Right.
And somehow I made it to Star Wars out of
Dude, I totally expected that was going to happen. It's just. I think it's just natural of us to find those kind of like those connecting points and everything. But yeah, it's that the entire time when we were talking about having this conversation, I'm like, how long can we go? I mean, we're already looking at just over an hour. And the Star Wars reference has finally made its appearance for the second time here, which I think is important because, of course, that's what we do. It's what we talk about on a regular basis. Even though we're talking about history, Star Wars has a connection. It really does. That's everything that George Lucas built it upon.
It does, and I'm trying to remember who I was saying this to, but watching Clone Wars again, the whole first season when the whole Death Watch stuff on Mandalore and the assassination attempts really reminded me of pre-World War II Japan.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that similar type of thing, and really radical elements who felt a need to return to what they thought was tradition, but really wasn't tradition. And they started taking these very radical actions, trying to assassinate people in power so that they could affect the social change they wanted. And in Clone Wars, you see Death Watch thinking that Mandalore's gone soft, and you restored Mandalore to what they thought was the true Mandalorian tradition. But
Right.
we're never shown. Were Mandalorians always that way? We don't know now because all that old EU stuff has been pushed aside. We just know that the black saber was given to this Mandalorian guy. There were times when Mandalorian fought, but did they always have that hardcore warrior tradition? It's not made apparent whether they did or not. And the Death Watch are trying to say, no, we did. We gotta take it back to this. And I'm watching that and I'm like, that is so much. That is pre-World War II Japan to it.
The whole mindset and having to kind of through tradition prove themselves in that sense of the warrior mentality, carrying that through.
And the thing is the whole warrior mentality they were preaching in pre-World War II Japan was largely a fabrication.
Right.
There was no, the sense of Bushido that they taught was not really, there was real no thing as Bushido. It didn't exist until the 19th century when I can't remember the Japanese guy's name. He went to England and he saw the whole concept of chivalry and gentleman stuff that the English had. He's like, wow, this is a really good idea. Yeah, I think we can make something similar to that in Japan. And so then he kind of adopted some traditional ideas and formulated it into what became the Bushido thing. But you read up on what real samurai guys in this Warring States period and what they say does not sound anything like Bushido. They're like, no, if you're gonna fight for a guy who's guaranteed to kill you, you don't fight for that guy.
Yeah.
You fight for the guy who's gonna tell you to live another day, and your end goal is to fight to live another day, no matter the means. Not, hey, go charge into that ship and die. Yes, sir. No, that's not it. That's not it. But that was just the whole Death Watch thing in Clone Wars. I'm like, wow, these guys are really kind of like setting on World War II Japan. This is pretty freaky. Maybe I'm the only person that's thinking that. I don't know.
No, it's you. And the first thing I thought about when you started discussing that was what we're seeing with Star Wars Rebels this season, with Sabine trying to like unify Mandalorians around the Empire. That the Empire and traditional Mandalorian culture will teach you that you're martyrs. You go out, you fight, you're this warrior culture. Sabine is trying to say you need a leader who's going to tell you are going to live the next day, that you're going to win this fight, that you're going to be able to see the next day as a victor and as one with the people. It's kind of funny how you mentioned that, and the first thing I think about is What did we just see the beginning of this season with Star Wars Rebels? You know, and what Sabine has been trying to do for the Mandalorian culture and her mother and her brother, of course.
Yeah, and the whole part where she's talking about the armor and how it's like the identity there, and that
Yeah.
I was like, well, I can see that because in a lot of these prominent, when you get to the Edo period in Japan, some of these daimyo did have special suits of armor that are up and displayed. Really good example of that is in the movie Seppuku, was came out in 1964. It's probably my top five favorite movies of all time. And this guy goes, well, it's a really complicated story to explain, but when he goes to this yashiki, which is the home of the residence of this warlord in Edo,
Uh-huh.
main hall, they have the armor of two generations before. The guys who fought under Tokugawa Ieyasu, and it's like shrine there, but it's this symbol of that family, of that heritage. And so when Sabine talks about the armor that way, that image instantly popped in my mind. I'm like, yeah, I can see that because it's like passed down from generation to generation, and it's considered to be a testament to your family's history of identity. And so a lot of those elements that I kind of feel that a lot of the Mandalorian elements are liberal interpretations of certain facets of Japanese warrior culture that have just been put in the Star Wars filter and made
Wow.
more mobile because they're all, but they don't use the Force.
Right. Right. We've got to determine that at this point.
With the Mandalorians, but then the whole philosophical aspect with the Jedi and the Force, and I'm writing something about that now, but
Oh,
hopefully I
wow.
can finish that tomorrow.
Right.
It's been quite the mind exercise because I would. This is again with the whole concept of the human brain. I started watching something a friend of mine, a Japanese friend of mine, had suggested I watch about the. It's called the Heart Sutra in English.
Huh.
In Japanese, they call it the Hanya Shingyo, and it's basically 262 kanji characters and all the basics of Buddhist thought compressed into that. And it shows, how do I say this? Very simply, it rejects the whole Western notion of I think, therefore I am.
Oh.
There is no I.
Right.
I is just a random, just happens to be this collection of five elements that are put together. And these are the five elements by which we process the world around us. But we have to realize that these five elements, in essence, are nothing. It's empty. And not the negative connotation that emptiness in English has. You would say empty is nothing.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, oh, well, that just as bad. No, there's nothing wrong with being empty. The thing about this is actually very liberating is that there's no form.
Right.
Therefore, the concept of pain or concept of suffering, when you realize that is founded in nothing, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the thing I was writing about is some of the things that Yoda says when you get a chance to study Eastern thought. You see some Japanese Shinto stuff, you see some Taoism, and then you see some Buddhist stuff. And that Hanya Shinto, it's really, after being raised in a Western tradition, and then you read something that's so complete, antithetical to it.
Right.
It's quite a mind bending exercise, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. but yeah, that's neither here or there. That's way beyond the scope of Master and Commander.
Yeah, then you're getting into the thought process of the mind and the concept of different thoughts and how they work. And yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
I'm trying. I think Master and Commander is kind of a funny Star Wars tie-in because the far side of the world.
Uh huh.
I'm trying to think. The Japanese translation of that is similar to how they say a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Really?
Let me see if I can find that please title that here. Okay. Master Commander. Okay, here it is. They just call it Master and Commander, but I'm pretty sure some
Uh-huh.
part of it they use this word. Um, somewhere they say Haruka Kanata, which
Okay.
Haruka Kanata means on the far side of something, and in Japanese, the long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it's Mukashi Mukashi Haruka Kanata no Ginkake de.
Oh wow. So there is a connection there.
Yeah, and when I saw Maz Kanata's name the first time 2 years ago, I'm like, that has to come straight from the Japanese because Haruka Kanata no Ginkake de, and that Kanata means far, far, far away.
Ah.
And so I never got a response from Pablo Hidalgo, but I tweeted him like, hey man, in Japanese, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away is this. Did you guys take the Kanata from that Japanese and use that for her name? Because if you did, for a Japanese speaker, it's pretty obvious. She is on Takodana, which is
Yeah.
Abrams admitted was an adaptation of a place here in Tokyo called Takada no Baba. He just changed it a little bit. I was like, so it'd be consistent with that.
Yeah.
Takodana, Kanata, Haruka Kanata no Ginkage de. I was like, sounds pretty. I mean, that's just too much of a coincidence to be a random thing, but
Yeah.
I never heard back. So
Yeah, Pablo's got his hands full with all the Porg stuff now, so I think he's trying to answer questions. Dave, I do have to ask you. I do have to ask you. All right, I know we've broken down Masters and Commander. We've broken down Napoleonic history. We've broken down history as world history. We've talked about everything. Let me just say that much.
mm.
While I got you here right now, I want your breakdown of what's going on with The Last Jedi. We got another 45-second spot the
Mm-hmm.
other night during the World Series. Luke walking into the Falcon.
Oh, that was awesome. That was I actually liked that 45-second one more than the previous 2 minute trailer.
Amen. Totally agree with you on that one.
I, it shouldn't be that way because it's shorter, but I felt what they did with that was far more impactful. Seeing Luke walk on to the Falcon again, so it's pretty certain that they're gonna leave.
Yeah.
Um, the whole line by Snoke of the darkness and the light rising to meet it. Um, and then I saw like a freeze frame shot of that, and you can see Hux is actually in that throne room
Uh
with him and all the Praetorian guards looking pretty badass in the background.
huh. See,
Um,
so you're a Praetorian person too. I love it.
I because the whole red armor thing is so much like this samurai unit
Oh
from
yeah.
the Sengoku period, the Akazonai. I mean, it's just really visually reminds me of that. So that's why I kind of flew into them. And they're using the things they use are very similar to like Naginata.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, so they took a Roman name and then it just gave them like Japanese style armor and gave them a Japanese Naginata. That's perfect. I have no complaints there. And I don't know, it's just yeah, I really liked this one so much it made me think Rey is gonna flirt with the dark side more than
Uh-huh.
especially when she's because it has that line where Luke says this is not going to go the way you think, and there she is, lighting the lightsaber. You're made to think that she's standing over him, whether she is or not. I don't know, but yeah, I can't wait for it to come out in just a little more than a month. So
Yeah, there's just so much building up with the Last Jedi. I totally agree. Actually, I was talking to Scott Inch last night, and I totally believe that these trailers have been cut in a certain way to make you. Of course, the first one was a complete
yeah,
just misdirection in terms of the way that they placed everything. But I think this one, in a way, I didn't feel as much of a misdirection. I think, and this is, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this because I talked to Scott about it last night. I've talked to Sean about it at the network. Curious to hear your thoughts. I think that Kylo Ren in the silencer, I think where we saw from the first trailer where he's flying through what looks to be probably one of the first order star destroyers, whether it's Snoke's ship or whatever else, when he goes into it and he flies out. I totally think that we're going to see this film kick off with a big bang, and I think that it's going to involve Ren and Ray and Luke. I think that they're not going to wait. They're going to jump us. I think that's what Ryan Johnson wanted too. He wanted us to jump right into the story.
I think so. That's a pretty fair guess, and I I would want them to do that because I just if you take too much time on Octo, which every time I think the name, I always want to say Octoon Baby, which is U2 album, but um, that's just my weird mind. But it would make sense to start off with a big bang because that's what they did. Empire Strikes Back, you get the Battle of Hoth right away. So whether it's going to be they're fighting on, was it Crate? Yeah,
Oh, great. Yeah.
or they're fighting out in space. I mean, I think it would be good to give the story a jolt right there. But then it's like, do Ray and Luke go back to Octo and do some more training there?
Right, right.
Because I mean, she could show up and tell him what's going on.
I just want to see a Revenge of the Sith style opening where we see like above crate, like before we enter the planet and we see what's happening there. Just have something happening, like maybe the space battle is happening before the actual battle of crate and everything. Just have that kind of scene because that's the first thing I thought about when I saw Kylo Ren in the silencer. I was like, "Whoa, this looks just like Anakin at the
It,
beginning
it
of
is.
Revenge of the Sith."
It is like Anakin Revenge of the Sith. It's also like Anakin in Phantom Menace when he goes flying through the Trade Federation ship.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, with each of these trailers, I don't know if it's because I watched the prequels more because my son he really loves episode 3 the most.
Uh-huh.
And then he likes Attack of the Clones too quite a bit. But I see so many more visual references to the prequels than I do to any of the original trilogy.
Yes.
And just like you said, with me, when I saw Kylo Ren doing that, I'm like, yes, that's just like Granddaddy. You're so everybody's like, well, his dad's Han Solo. I'm like, yeah, Han Solo did not fly like that.
No.
That is 100% Anakin Skywalker right there. And but the other really cool shot of him and the First Order troopers marching into what looks like
Oh, that was so great.
it's like Anakin going right into the Jedi Temple, and like when Ray went into that pool or something, I
Yeah.
instantly thought Obi-Wan after he gets shot down by the clones and he falls into that pool. I was like, that's just like Obi-Wan falling into that pool. I don't know if circumstances would be similar or not, but the visual cue was, I mean, instantly thought, oh, Obi-Wan falling into the pool after getting betrayed by the clones in Order 66.
Yeah.
That's episode 3. Oh, this is Anakin marching into the Jedi Temple. That's episode 3. Oh, this is Anakin kicking ass in the Battle of Coruscant. That's episode 4. Oh, this is it, Ryan Johnson really likes the prequels, at least visually.
Right.
And that's a friend of mine. He sent me this essay a while back, and I can't remember the professor's name, but she said that episode 3 is one of the best pieces, but she claims it's the best piece of visual and contemporary art in the last 25 years.
Wow.
Um, One second, I can find that essay for you real quick, and I'll send it over.
Yes, I think anybody should read that. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing because she does a. You can watch a video of her talking about it on YouTube, but there's also some good articles related to that. And but she says like the whole battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin is kind of like reminded her of which opera, like a some opera by Puccini or something. She said it's just like two
Wow.
choreographed guys, no different than a classic opera. And
That's good because we'll need that article to help prove Jim Roberge that the prequels are worth something. So we'll send that right his way, and then we'll see what he feels about it after.
well, the art. Okay, this is it. Art critic claims Revenge of the Sith is the greatest work of art in the past 30 years. So
Wow.
she says, um, I don't know how he's going to take who the author. The lady is a pretty famous academic by the name of Camille Paglia,
Okay.
and she called George Lucas the world's greatest living artist, saying the finale of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, as having more inherent artistic value, emotional power, and global impact than any other work of art in the last 30 years. That's what she said. And she gave these comments I think initially in an interview with Vice.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Wow.
I think there's links. This isn't the exact same article that I read, but I think you can
Probably access it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can access it. Here, I'm gonna put it here. There's the link, and let's see if I can find
Perfect.
her on YouTube. She does actually a seminar or something. I remember watching it, and when you listen to her bring up these points, it's like when you go back and watch Revenge of the Sith after that, your whole perspective is completely changed because you start to look for the things that she brings up, and then when you do that, you're like, oh my god, why did I miss all this stuff?
Right. Right.
And I really think that this is something I taught myself to do with the prequels is just do what Yoda says, unlearn what you have learned, and not watch them as wanting them to be like the original three, watching them just as for what they are.
Huh.
And I personally I visually like them
Oh, visually, yes, I agree with you.
better than the original trilogy, maybe save for Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back is still my favorite. Oh, here it is. Okay. Camellia Paglia on the sneering art establishment and the genius of George Lucas. There's. This is from 5 years ago. So yeah, that's about the time that article came out. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here.
Awesome.
She's got some pretty interesting things to say. Here we go. All right, let's see if I can get this. Send this your way, and then I'm gonna make it to slumber time because it's 1:20 in the morning here.
Wow.
I'm on tomorrow for you.
That's right.
I'm speaking to you from the future.
How cool is that?
You're speaking to the future. You're speaking to Sunday. I'm speaking to Saturday.
Wow. That's amazing.
So when I watched the Cubs win the World Series last year, for me it was November 3rd. And then on Facebook this past week I'm seeing all this. November 2nd is Cubs Day, and I'm like, oh, that's right, because it was November 2nd when they won the World Series. For me,
November 3rd.
It was November 3rd. I was watching it from 9 o'clock in the morning on November 3rd. Yeah, that's I always the international dateline is quite the crazy thing. Fly back to the States, and I technically arrived in the States 1 hour after I left Tokyo on the same day.
Wow.
It's trippy.
Yeah, to say the least. To say the least, it's absolutely trippy. But no, David, this has been such a great conversation. I think
I don't know how you're gonna edit it. Just I hope people can sit and follow the meandering.
No, you know what? I think we have a pretty good team over here. I think between DJ Brian Fontaine, myself, Sean, I think I'm feeling like section episodes. Like we're talking about the American Revolution for a period, then we talk about the French Revolution and Napoleon and stuff. I'm feeling it could definitely. And then we talked about world thinking and being aware of our surroundings and people and
the ability of human beings. Yeah.
Yeah, and that could be a section alone. So I think we've got some pretty epic stuff. But one thing that I won't edit out, Dave, is this part right here, which we call plug time here at the podcast network. That's right. Where can the good people find you across social media?
They can find me on Twitter at NORSKAKIRUNO, Norska Kiruno. That's because I'm Norwegian by blood, and Akiruno is where I live here in Tokyo. I do a bilingual blog. Try to put up 2 things a month. It's called Akiruno's Life. So if you just look that up, you should probably be able to find it. I write about mainly a lot of Japanese culture stuff, but then sometimes I write how things tie into Star Wars. I'm currently trying to write something about 3 aspects of Japanese religious and philosophical thought that can be seen reflected in what Yoda says to Luke on Dagobah in one line. And
wow,
it's quite the mind trip reading through that. But so yeah, if you want to read things from the perspective of the other side of the world, you can look at my Twitter stuff or that blog. And I try to do everything both in English and Japanese, so I don't alienate people who can only speak one language. So if I sound confused at times, yeah, it's probably the fault of 2 languages working at once.
They're crossing over there.
I'm happy with that problem. I don't mind that problem.
That's a good problem.
It's a good problem.
It's a very, very, very good problem. But yeah, so you guys can follow me over on Twitter at Mr. Vote Tweets. Make sure to head on over to Instagram. Follow me at The Official Vote. Please make sure to head on over to BrickCityBlockade.com for everything happening here at the Podcast Network. A lot of great events coming up. Going to make some announcements very soon about some other events that we're going to be doing locally. And then hopefully as we move into 2018, there's going to be a lot of national events that we're going to be announcing. So please make sure to keep it locked. And of course, please head on over to iTunes, rate, subscribe, and comment. Definitely subscribe because that's what brings on these epic conversations, whether it's about Star Wars, whether it's about history, doesn't matter, whether it's about life itself. Star Wars always finds a way in there somehow. But we'd love to have discussions with people like Dave Hackerson and everybody else in the Star Wars community. And also make sure to head on over to Google Play, subscribe over there for the Android users of the world, and make sure to enjoy it across the network. Thank you guys for listening to Talkin' Long Ago, also known as Talkin' Far Away here on the network. Dave Hackerson, thank you so much for coming on and talking. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you guys for listening. And as we always say here, may the force be with you.